I've met so many people who find it challenging asking questions. In fact, at times they admit that they don't know what to ask. And this even comes from graduates who study journalism. Is it because we don't know what to ask because we don't know the subject matter, or is it because we don't practice communication enough? Asking questions is an art that has to be nurtured. Datuk Fauzi Omar, he was a former editor with the Malay Mail. What made him great was because he often asked the right questions and his articles were very thought-provocative. The thing is that what made him good, and many other journalists during his era, was that they adopted this simple tips. You got to start by being a good listener. When I mean a good listener, I don't mean just listen to words, but observe the body language, the way the person speaks, the tone, the intonation. All this helps because you will then be able to craft your questions better. But a lot of us don't do that. A lot of us just bypass all those things and we just ask questions just for the sake of asking. Stop doing that. You should understand the subject you're talking to. What is the justification and how he has arrived or she has arrived to a particular statement or decision. And this will help in the way you ask questions. For example, I will often go for an interview prepared with a list of questions. However, upon speaking to the subject, I will then realize that perhaps 3 or 4 questions that I've prepared can be further improvised just by listening to what he or she has just said. So I may have come to an interview with something else in my mind, but I will leave the interview with something else altogether. Whenever I prepare to interview or give a presentation, I first stop and remind myself that I'm there to ask questions, not to talk too much or behave like I'm the subject matter expert. Secondly, I observe. I read facial expressions and body languages. You need to observe to see if people are paying attention to you or not. 3, empathize. It's not always about you, and you are dealing with humans, not robots. Read and embrace emotions. You need to inject empathy, especially when dealing with a tragic or serious subject. If a person in front of you is crying, console him or her. Don't just stand there. You need to connect with the people you're talking to. And lastly, ask. After speaking, it's always good to ask if people truly understood what you said. That addresses any misunderstanding on the spot and results in effective communication to ensure your audience does not leave the room or hall with more questions instead of answers. Of course, there's a difference between one-to-one communication and one-to-many. Now, in one-to-one communications, things understandably tend to get more personal. Hence, the initiative to understand the person's background, personality, and character is important. Finding the common ground within the group becomes important. That's the difference between interacting with an individual or with a group. When people are in groups, there will be leaders and followers in the group. This applies to both personal and in the professional context. If you read a crowd accurately more often than not, sometimes presenting to a crowd can also mean focusing on a few key individuals. Understanding that power dynamic is also crucial when you're addressing them. I'm often reminded of this one particular lady, an elderly lady who used to be my neighbor. And to me, she was the best journalist I've ever come across because she knew everything that happened in the neighborhood. Now, some may call it, busybody, some may call it kepochi, but to me, she often asked the right questions to actually get the answers. And I think my introduction to the journalism world, with not me realizing, was actually my interaction with her. Why? Because her level of curiosity was beyond anyone else I've ever met. She was just always eager to know. So she was always intrigued to making connections. She wanted to know you as a person. your background. So that level of curiosity is something that is pretty much in her DNA, and it is actually interesting because this trait is something journalists have to use to ensure that they get the right kind of questions asked and the answers. When I just shifted into my neighborhood, I had conversations with my neighbors and I found out that we had so many things in common. My next door neighbor, he's like an exercise freak. My other neighbor loves cooking, and we used to exchange recipes. So it's a simple act of asking the right questions and being curious. Asking questions is a branch of communication. If you don't talk, you will not know what to say, you will not know what to ask. When I first started journalism, like many others, you were learning from your peers, learning from your seniors. So the way I asked questions, it was a bit more rough on the edges, often refer to somebody more senior than me to ask those questions because I was not exposed to those kind of conversations. Sometimes there are conversations that may lead to a debate, for example. The experience was naturally nerve-wracking, I would not lie, in the initial days because you want to be saying the right words. You don't want to offend any party. But what I've realized very quickly is that, look, they are also humans at the end of the day. It boils down to having empathy. It boils down to having an interest. It boils down to having this eagerness to know. So the next time when you have a conversation with anyone, just remember, you inject some care into that conversation. Be empathetic in your approach and always do your homework before engaging in communication with anyone. When you adapt and you learn to ask the right questions and articulate your questions in a certain manner, clarifying your doubts, erasing any presumptions and assumptions, you will develop that journalistic instinct, and that will very much set you apart from your competitors and will naturally improve your communication skill between you and the other party.